Welcome into the podcast, everybody. My name is Arky. That is Joel C. Cortez. Joel, it's been a couple of weeks. Some things have happened in our lives and in the lives of these magical NBA players. In fact, in a lot of their lives, to be honest with you, that has affected a lot of things. But we are glad to be back with you, Joel. It's good to see your face, and more importantly, hear them tones, brother.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. If you want to, for some reason, see our faces, you can do that on YouTube. Like, share, subscribe, ring the bell over there.
If you want to watch us sit down and do this interview or this conversation one-on-one, it's the YouTubes.
Yeah, you want the jersey collection in the background, any of that stuff. And if you don't, that's fine. I mean, Spreaker, Spotify, iTunes, that's where you get the podcast. Please give us a like, share, subscribe there as well. Arky, Shea, this is episode 88. And surprisingly enough, there are 8 players in NBA history who have worn 88. And it is a recently popular number. The first guy to be wearing number 88 was in 2005. That would be Antoine Walker. And since then, there have been, and that was in his return to the Boston Celtics for his second stint there. He previously wore 8 originally when he was in Boston. But since then, there have been 7 different guys who have worn 88, including 5 currently in the NBA right now. Yeah, Nick Batum has worn it since 2009. Goga Bitadze, who came in with the Indiana Pacers, he's still a backup center there, has worn it for 3 seasons. Markieff Morris currently wears it. He had it with the Pistons in 2020 and then on the Lakers here. Ninius Queta on the Sacramento Kings. I have no idea who that is. In fact, he's playing in the future because Basketball Reference lists him only in 2022 as wearing that number. So I don't know if he's like a G League guy or if he's been signed to maybe a 10-day contract as an injury replacement and it doesn't become official until the 1st. I don't know what's happening, but Basketball Reference has a time machine. The 5th guy on the list is the one that we're going to name the episode for, just because he's one of those role players that I really like. He came in with the Minnesota Timberwolves in 2016, and right now he's been a very underrated glue guy on a bench that is filled with underrated glue guys. That's the Golden State Warriors. And this is the Nemanja Bjelica episode on Basketball by Association. Belly, as he is more easily called, is a guy who can hit the 3. He can run the point a little bit. He's a big 6'10", kind of prototypical Euro power forward. But the dude was the EuroLeague MVP twice before coming over to the NBA. He was a reserve with the Timberwolves and with the Kings and played well enough, but you've been able to see some of the savviness this year on that loaded Golden State Warriors team where he's just come out and knocked down shots and moved the ball to the right guy. And on a team that's filled with right decision makers and playing that beautiful game, moving that basketball, he was the perfect find.
I don't completely disagree. I also feel like, okay, so I'm going to be completely honest with you, Joel C. Cortez.
Yeah, I would expect nothing less and hope for nothing more.
This is as lukewarm as I've felt about the NBA in a long time. And not like this season, right? Just this last couple of weeks has been rough. Like, it has been rough with all the protocols, for all the players going into protocols, all the elite talent that we haven't been able to see play. Essentially, we're seeing G League dudes like the dude you just mentioned, was Aquatus or something, the guy from the future, right? Yeah. Like, I remember seeing his name like on Twitter, like he's on he's part of their G League team. I do know that. He may have played at some point for Sacramento during this stretch. I think he has, maybe. But he's got no stats. I'm sure. I feel like I would have seen something if he had gone off.
Right.
Yeah, like Joe, I feel like the overwhelming feeling for me, and I do have a couple interesting things that I really find interesting about the last couple of weeks. But for me, like, you tell me what you think. I've just been really underwhelmed and disappointed, not by the NBA and like how they've handled anything, but just because they've been so ravaged, like the games that they do get on, like it's tough to get really jazzed about some of it, you know?
Yeah, there's over 100 players in the protocols right now. We haven't heard too many stories of anybody like really being in serious rough shape, so we hope that continues. You know, good health, quick recovery for everybody. But it really does feel like silly season. You know, that's the best term that I can think of for it. This is silly season right now because you don't know which players you're going to have. Some of these rosters are, as you said, literal G League rosters right now with replacements. It seems to be so fluid, but then there's other teams. Like I'm just running through the list right now. There's 100 players in the protocol. Certain teams, though, are better equipped right now than others. The Chicago Bulls only have one player out. That's Lonzo Ball. Nuggets.
But they basically started all this. I had games
they
canceled
did.
like 2 weeks. So like they're just not getting out of the protocol.
Yep. And we're going to talk about that in a minute. The Nuggets have 2. The Clippers have 2. The Grizzlies have 2. Heat have 1. Bucks have 1. Pelicans 2. Suns have 2. Spurs have 1. Wizards have 2. Everybody else has 3 or more. Many teams have 7, 8 players in the protocol and have had to postpone games or just completely gut their own G League guys and even bring up guys that weren't in their system yet.
If you're paying attention to sort of the signing wires or social media with Woj and Shams trying to give like the names, like almost that are getting pulled up and signed up, you're just like, I keep saying, who?
Well, there's that side of it.
Well, because some of it, what I'm saying is like some of it gets to so deep down. These teams that are losing like 6, 7, 8 players, you're just like, I got no idea. Why am I to tune into that game?
It feels like when you're in NBA 2K and you get into those future seasons and you didn't download a draft class, and so it's just making up names of guys. It really does feel like that. But then at the same time, CJ Miles is back in the NBA. Joe Johnson is back in the NBA. Like
Isaiah Thomas got back.
Yeah. Well, good for Isaiah Thomas. Like, absolutely.
Well, this is an opportunity for him to be because he got back into this.
Exactly.
Kemba Walker got back into the NBA.
Yes, and balled out, right? Like you got a little bit of the Tom Thibodeau FU tour here from Kemba, which we're all here for. Like we all want to see that. If nothing else, Kemba to play up some value and go to a team where he's going to fit, because as you and I talked about a couple weeks ago, there still is a role for Kemba in the NBA. It's just not as your starting point guard on a team that really badly needs a starting point guard. But now that Derrick Rose is hurt, you go back to Kemba, and I think you'll get something out of him. But you know, to backtrack to a point, this is an opportunity for a lot of young guys who would never otherwise get a look. And we are, statistically speaking, we are going to find a couple diamonds in the rough during this period of time that are going to play their way onto an NBA roster, potentially change their entire career trajectory, and maybe even have an NBA career or more just because this happened. And then somebody else like an Isaiah Thomas, probably not a Joe Johnson because of the age, but you never know. Some of these older guys who were washed out of the system, again, playing in China, playing in Europe, or just staying in shape at home and playing at their local rec league. Like some of these guys are going to give us another year, maybe even 2 in an NBA uniform, and call it an asterisk if you want, because it absolutely is. But this isn't all doom and gloom. There's some massive opportunities here. And the thing I really want to touch on, Arky, Shea, is if you are a team that is healthy right now, whether you weathered your COVID wave already like the Bulls have done, or you've just had good health and good luck so far, I don't care if you're a team with a losing record, if you're in the playoff hunt, you have got to take advantage of this and rattle off and bank as many wins as you can during silly season. There can be no lackadaisical play. This has to be absolute freaking urgency for your team to rack up those wins. And that's why somebody like the Sacramento Kings, for example, who have come out and been so lackluster the last few games, to the point that Alvin Gentry, the interim head coach, just the other night was saying this was the worst NBA like sense of urgency worst game I've ever been a part of. And Alvin Gentry's been around the block a number of times in some bad situations. If you are a team like that, blow it up. Like nobody wants to be there at this point. You cannot do that when you've got these skeleton crews that you're facing. And it's why it's so disappointing that a team like the Lakers, who, yeah, they're ravaged a little bit too, no Anthony Davis, but they've looked so bad when they need this time to get going.
I'll say this, and on your point, I'm fine with guys getting opportunities, but Joe, like the NBA Christmas is the NBA's day.
Yeah.
Right. In leading up to that's what I think is so disappointing. That's supposed to be the coming out party for the NBA every year for the most part. That's why they're trying to get this beginning of the year tournament started to get interest up early in the season, which, by the way, more on that in a minute, because apparently there's been some headway on that. I just think like it's really disappointing. Like the NBA, more so than any other league, is a stars league. It is a superstars league. And when literally, I shouldn't say literally, I haven't kind of make sure, but like top flight players, including some of the top flight players, have been unable to participate because of this. It's why you start seeing leagues to re-examine what their policy is going to be. I mean, let's just go ahead and piggyback into what's going forward. Kyrie Irving is going to be on this was going to be on this Brooklyn Nets roster, partly because the Nets got so hit so hard. Partly because there's other reasons, because of the COVID protocols. Partly is also because Kevin Durant can't be playing 40 minutes a night also. And then Kyrie comes aboard, and as soon as he gets into the system and starts testing, boom, he's out too.
Karma, right? Karma.
It's just such a rough time for the NBA, especially when this is supposed to be the launch of their season, the unofficial launch of their season. That you have all of these athletes go down, and it's been leading up for the past 2.5 weeks. And Christmas, you'd hope to get some of those guys back, but you didn't get all of them back. And I think that's what's so tough about it, is that this league, it's so dependent upon superstars to be sort of nationally relevant that you may really, really want to watch some basketball, but do you really want to watch the Nets for the most part without Kyrie or Kevin Durant or James Harden? Right? Like
no, but I do think it's an opportunity. Like if you're a superstar centric viewer, and most people are, yeah, you may tune out of the Nets, but there are certain teams like Milwaukee that's fully healthy all of a sudden, or Golden State that still has Steph, or Phoenix, at least on Christmas Day, had their full complement of stars. Or the fact that Nikola Jokic is right now having the greatest player efficiency rating season in NBA history while he keeps his team afloat. I think you gravitate towards those teams and those games that otherwise, maybe if you're a big market fan, a Lakers fan, a Knicks fan, Nets, whatever, those are your secondary teams that you maybe give lesser attention to. And right now, this is the opportunity to go and watch those teams that are fully healthy and to take advantage of that. And those are the teams that, again, like Milwaukee has no excuse. They got to rack up as many wins as they can right now. Phoenix, absolutely. Golden State, they both have been taking care of business doing that. I think there's a huge opportunity here for the Nuggets, who are so depleted and should be dead in the water. But Jokic is playing so well. Even somebody like San Antonio, who's jumped into the playoff picture again, when San Antonio talent-wise has shown they can't compete with the full complement teams, but they are well coached, they are well drilled, and they have been able to plug in some of their lesser guys and then go out and beat these teams that are not fully in sync and are not as well drilled as San Antonio is. And those are the teams that absolutely have to do something with this. Going back to Kyrie Irving.
Yeah, we can move on a little bit past COVID and start going into that news, because that was awesome news. that was awesome. The guy, I'd have to go back and find my tweet, but the guy who refused to play because he wouldn't get his shot now won't be allowed because of the testing for the shot that he won't get, because he's got he's in the protocols and test positive for that could have possibly, but who knows at this point.
Neither of us are wishing harm on Kyrie Irving. We're not. Neither of us are wishing harm.
It's not going to hurt my feelings. Irving. That's all I'm saying. Okay, I'll just put. It's not going to hurt my feelings.
But yes, the irony, the karma of it is delicious in a way.
Well, can we get to the point, like, how important? So the fact that the Nets were going to cave in to this, and remember the Nets make this big pomp and circumstance beginning statement that we are not going to have a half a dude playing half a season. Yeah. We're going to play this guy if he decides to get vaccinated, or if the mandates change and the rules change.
Yep.
Then he will be a part of this team. Next thing you know, James Harden's not having an especially prolific year to start the season. Kevin Durant is, but he's playing a ton of minutes.
In an unsustainable way that's going to shorten his career, honestly.
And all of a sudden, you got not only people on that staff, players too, saying, hey, we need some help. I understand that we're still doing well, but like we can't keep doing this, expect to win a title. Yeah. The fact that the Nets are caving right now to say that, all right, you can practice with us at the facility, and you can play road games for the most part. We'll take that just to try to give some help to Kevin Durant. What do you think about the Nets' decision to do so?
I have gone back and forth on this. So last week was one of the few times, it happens like maybe 3 times a year, that I hear something Stephen A. Smith says in one of his diatribes, and I go, I absolutely agree with you, Stephen A. Absolutely. So Stephen A. Smith just completely lit into the Nets, lit into Kyrie Irving, that this was, one of the more disgusting things he had ever seen. And it was typical Stephen A. hyperbole, but I agree with it to the extent that the hypocrisy of caving after all they had said, after all they had tried to prove and do, that you would cave for this guy, Kyrie Irving, was specifically his point. Like, if it had been somebody else, fine, you maybe make that decision pragmatically. But the fact that Kyrie has hijacked 3 different franchises and made it all about him wherever he's gone, has only decided to play when he wants to play, has had no problem cashing the checks, but has sat at home for his own personal reasons more often than he's actually played over the last couple of years, is really troubling. So I absolutely agree with Stephen A. Smith on that point. On the other hand, this week, as I've thought about it more and also looked at where the wins are right now within the United States on COVID and Omicron especially, I'm not as hard against it, because from that pragmatic standpoint, the Nets have been ravaged as badly, if not worse, than just about anybody else in the NBA. They really just need bodies. They are chasing a championship. And there comes that point where if he's been willing to take that risk for himself to get COVID, and you allow other players in the NBA to be unvaccinated, because they are there, it's like 2 to 3% of the league's body. And again, you maybe wouldn't bend the rules or backtrack in a normal scenario, but you may be putting your healthy players at risk of injury, of wearing down, of all the work that they've put in for the title team. And you've got a talented player who is waiting in the wings. I can see how you begin to talk yourself into that. The other aspect of this too is, while Omicron is everywhere, and there are certainly deaths from it, the transmission rate is very high, but the death rate has been rather low in comparison. And it seems like more than not around the United States right now, people are just accepting that as a risk, that normal life is continuing. Those who have decided to go unvaccinated probably aren't going to change their stance at this point, and again are assuming that risk for themselves and their loved ones. Those who are vaccinated also are assuming quite a bit of risk and are out and about doing their thing. And so it seems like the collective mindset here has been, this is out there, it's possible to get it, you have a lower likelihood of dying, especially if you're vaccinated, especially if you've had your booster, all that stuff. And so you go and you do your thing. We haven't had shutdowns at this point. It doesn't look like, and heaven forbid that we have them. But so it just seems like the mood has changed right now versus where it was at the beginning of the season, where it was Delta variant that was more dominant. The death rates were higher out of it. We were still in a lot of uncertainty. And there was this mood that said, quarantine and isolation and prevention is the name of the game right now. And that's changed to where people are saying it can't be fully prevented. So get vaccinated if you want to get vaccinated, take your risk if you don't, and you're probably going to build up some antibodies because everybody's going to wind up getting it in some way, shape, or form here for now.
I think it's wild to think that the Nets started this whole thing by saying, look, we got to do what's best for the team, right? And now caving in this might probably is what's best for the team.
It might be.
Right. Like it's so interesting that Kyrie just sort of waited them out. And I'm not saying that like this was a ploy by him by any stretch. I mean, he would have taken money just to sit to the side. But the fact that the Nets needed the body so badly, and the fact that, their star player has been they're still the number one team in the East, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he's doing more than his part every single night to keep that team more than afloat, but the number one team in the East.
And so are a lot of those role players too, the guys who are still there. And you give hats off to Steve Nash and to James Harden as well. Like, they're doing what they have to do, and it hasn't been easy, as you've said.
You would think, like, during this stretch, if there was a team that has an excuse to drop a few, maybe find themselves third in the East or something right now, it's probably the Nets. And the fact that Kevin Durant's probably not coming back until maybe this weekend, it's still wild to find them. Let's see what has them up. That they're at 2 games up, but game and a half up right now as we're speaking. Up in the East is rather remarkable, and the fact that you could see the writing on the wall minutes wise, you could see the wear and tear wise, and just having an acceptable roster at this point. It could be that time that, whenever you can't have them, it's a definite big bonus to have that guy, at least for right now, for some road trips.
And again, New York's and Canada's stances on this have not changed. LA's stances have not changed.
Well, Canada is like super strict.
Right. So he's only going to be able to help to an extent, but right now the Nets will take that help. And again, looking at both sides of the coin here, state laws in many of these other NBA venues being looser. And again, people have been, at least through their legislature, the majority of people signing off on this idea that they're willing to take that risk and not do a shutdown and not do so strict of a quarantine or protocol or whatever it is. The Nets are playing within the rules. They're not bending the rules. They're going back on their word, like you said, but
well, that's the only thing. That's the quote unquote integrity play if you wanted to play it. But like there's the NBA's made a rule as far as how much you can get paid and where he's allowed to practice, blah blah blah, and like what he could do. The state, like I said, the local authorities said theirs, and the Nets are complying. It's just they have made this big thing about Kyrie's not. We're not playing with with somebody who's only going to be half a player for us this year,
right?
And now they're forced. Their hands forced,
and they especially made that point early on when you probably didn't know Kyrie's mental state with all of this, and there was going to be major annoyance that, dude, you can get vaccinated and you're choosing not to. Come on, man, we need you. Like, we're supposed to be chasing a championship. And it was the right call. It was the right message to say, look, you're either all in or you're not. And now at this point, again, with the winds and sands shifting just a little bit and Brooklyn's situation shifting, and I would have to imagine, Steve Nash has mentioned multiple times that, I stay in contact with Kyrie Irving very consistently. It's not always about basketball stuff, but I would have to imagine that Steve Nash and probably the front office have a better sense of where Kyrie's head is at right now. And to say, look, we may agree to disagree on this, but we believe that he can help us and that his head is in the right place to come in and be productive. That means a lot. And you gave a chance for this situation to develop and evolve. So there is something to be said for keeping your word, steadfast and unchanging. But there also is something to be said for that pragmatic side to go, we had our mandate, we had our strategy, but we also can be pragmatic and not just dig our heels into the sand for the sake of doing it. And I just want to mention that as we're on the air here right now, the NBA just announced that they're going to reduce the mandatory quarantine from 10 days to 6 days for players who test positive. So, Arky, you mentioned that at the top of the show. NFL did that, I think, like a week and a half ago. As long as you're testing negative and not showing any signs, and this has been bandied about in the real world here too, that quarantines can go down a little bit because Omicron is while very highly transmissible, doesn't need as long of a time period. And I don't want to be spouting any pseudoscience here. I don't know for sure, but that seems to be what we're hearing. And again, the fact that it just seems like a foregone conclusion that this is going to be one of those things like the cold, like the flu, that is out there and you can get. And as long as it's milder versions, yeah, unfortunately, people still die from the cold and flu every single day, every single year. But is the risk of COVID now greater than those things that we accept on a daily basis? And it seems like we're trending towards acceptable risk.
Is it an acceptable risk for Tom Thibodeau to keep playing Kemba Walker, baby? Come on now. Listen, thank you, COVID, in a weird way. But because of everyone getting it, he had to play Kemba. Like Tom Thibodeau had to play Kemba Walker. And Kemba Walker is having a handful of really good games in a row. I think his last one wasn't so great, but I think that was actually the one that, I think they got the win on that one. That's pretty,
on Christmas, yeah.
Yeah, so he's going for over 40, and again, I think he had 41 through 3 quarters against Boston the game before. His stat
it was against Washington, 44 points.
44 against Washington, that's right.
And 8 assists, and he triple-doubled on Christmas, didn't he?
Yeah. 20, not 20. It was a week. It was like 10-10 and like 11 or 10-10 and 12 or something like that. But very acceptable outputs. Let's see. Look, I actually have it right up here. 29 against Boston, 21 against Detroit, 44 against Washington, and 10, but a triple-double also against the Hawks and winning on Christmas. Joe, haven't gotten all the wins out of it, but doesn't look like Kemba's dead yet. So that's kind of nice. Tom Thibodeau had to play him because he was one of the last dudes on the roster. Boom. That's how you change hearts and minds, baby. You play him because you have to.
I'm happy for him.
Knicks, by the way, only 2 games out right now of being the very last secure playoff team. Just saying. Mm-hmm. Just saying. You know what's weird? Like in all of this, like both conferences, despite all the COVID issues and people being out, we haven't seen a lot of movement in the standings. Like since you and I last spoke. So like we've seen a lot of like 2-game winning streak here, 3-game losing streak, 2-game winning streak. So like going on to your point, someone able to take advantage, maybe get a hot streak going, could be very advantageous to them. Like my New York Knicks, who play your T-Wolves tomorrow night.
Indeed, they do, and both teams again will not be at complete full strength, but. Yeah. Minnesota's done fairly well. Again, inconsistency, they rattle off 4, then they drop 3. That's been kind of the MO all season. I'm happy for Kemba. Like we said, he's got a place in the NBA. I believe there's a place in the NBA for Isaiah Thomas. These are their opportunities to take advantage of that. Isaiah Thomas, that's been reported, will not be re-signed by the Lakers to another 10-day contract, but I have to imagine he's going to get a look from other people, and hopefully he can find that spot where he sticks. What's really interesting to me here, Arky, is that the standings, despite silly season, are really, with 1 or 2 exceptions in each conference, beginning to shake out basically how they were predicted or in logical ways. Like the Washington Wizards have cooled off from their really hot start and are back as a play-in level playoff team, which is exactly what seems realistic for them. It's an outlier that the Cleveland Cavaliers are still sitting up in 5th. Major kudos to them. You know, Kevin Love may be just playing to get himself traded. I don't know, but has shown that he's not a walking corpse after all.
That's right.
Darius Garland looks like the starting point guard going forward, regardless of what happens to Colin Sexton when he comes back. Sexton, I think, would be great there as their 6th man. Or maybe you move him for a different piece. Evan Mobley has been great. I mean, it's just the massive starting front line with Mobley and Jarrett Hayes, or not Jarrett Hayes. Now I'm spacing here, but Lauri Markkanen up front, and help me out here. Having a total brain fart on name. Evan Mobley, Jared Allen. There we go. That's why. Jared Allen, like the massive front line of those guys has actually worked out in the modern NBA. So that's a team taking advantage of its opportunities and suddenly finding like its path forward. I thought Cleveland would be worse off than Detroit even this year, and have been pleasantly proven wrong. In the Western Conference, Denver staying higher than they really should be. They're in the top 6 right now. Lakers would be that outlier of being lower, but losing Anthony Davis was exactly the worst case scenario you and I outlined at the beginning of the season, that is the one guy upon which everything hinges, especially your defense. And so now as they try to bring in other bodies, whether it's Isaiah Thomas, Darren Collison, these are all guys who help you in the scoring department a little bit, and they're veterans, but nobody that they found so far helps them on that defensive end. And that's why the Lakers are still sitting 2 games under 500. But you look at the Western Conference even, and aside from the Phoenix Suns being in second place, I don't think any of us really expected them to be up that high, but like 4th or 5th would have been reasonable. And the Chicago Bulls sitting in second in the Eastern Conference, same thing with them. 4th or 5th felt like their ceiling. Everything else feels relatively right.
The biggest one to me is because I felt so good for them was the Hawks, and the Hawks still. I mean, they're not dead, but like
they're the equivalent of the Lakers in the Eastern Conference. They're the equivalent of that one team that really should be higher, and due to circumstance and poor play, just haven't gotten it yet. I agree.
Yeah, and they're still a handful of games away from being able to host first round of the playoffs. I just, they just haven't been able to put a bunch of wins together. And I don't know, man. Losing guys like Trae Young recently because of COVID and stuff. You just
of the teams that are sitting just outside the playoff picture, Toronto, like, you're not frustrated. That's about where they should be. They've been in the mix. That'll be fine. You're frustrated with the Knicks.
Yes, I am very frustrated. With the Knicks.
They should be higher. They have not found that defensive identity. They've had their problems with Kemba, whatever. And then in the Western Conference, it's Portland by a landslide. Like, you talk about all of these opportunities that are in front of you. What do you think
about the fact that Portland's like not ready to blow anything up yet? Still, like, Portland's still.
That's where I was.
They're still fighting.
Like, of these teams that are just on the bubble, or maybe that are in the bubble, sitting in the 7 to 10 seed, just because you're in that spot does not always mean that you are where you want to be, depending on the trajectory of your team. You could be a massive disappointment sitting in there like Boston or Atlanta. Of those teams on or in the bubble, near the bubble, who would you blow up? Because you can't accept this result if you are certain teams, and there comes that point where you cut your losses and you begin the rebuild, because sitting in the 10th through 12 seeds is the absolute last place you want to be if you're an NBA team that wants to move forward. You will lose your superstars. They will go somewhere else. You will not get the draft picks you need, and you'll not get the salary relief that you need either. So eventually you run up that white flag.
I think it's an easy 1 and 2 for me. It's Boston and Portland, 1 and 2, because Boston has 2 really good young players, and they are 2 really young players that are going to be stars in this league. Mm-hmm. Maybe Jason Tatum is going to be the superstar, but Jaylen Brown ain't nothing, right? Jaylen Brown is really, 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 really good.
Yep.
And in a good place, he could be, or even a bad place. I mean, whatever.
I think Jaylen Brown ideally is the 3rd best player on a championship team. I'm not sold on him as your second best.
Yeah, maybe ideally.
I know the numbers bear it out that he probably can be your second best, but based on what we've seen from Boston, I would love Jaylen Brown to be the 3rd wheel somewhere and be that gap filler in all those little things that he does.
And I think you could get a pretty decent return for him. Mm-hmm. If you're Portland, like it's just not working, man. Like, it did at some point, and I know you have your off the court issues in Portland right now, and it sort of feels not super fair for like Jason Kidd to be dealing with all of that right now, and then possibly shipping off your
You mean Chauncey Billups?
Chauncey Billups. And then having to like immediately think of before the All-Star break or just after Christmas, getting rid of your best player and your franchise player.
And they just fired their GM and Neil O'Shea, so
Yeah.
you've got an interim guy in that position having to make these decisions.
Yeah, it's not a great situation there, but like you can still get a really good haul if you decide to finally blow that up too.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you just wanted to think about the Knicks, there's nothing to blow up. You're gonna get breakfast coupons for guys, so there's nothing really to blow up there. So, I mean, you got a big contract in Julius Randle, and you got young guys like R.J. Barry. You can like if you really want it. But Derrick Rose is 100 and not playing, and Kemba Walker's 100 with broken legs.
Right, and won't fetch you more than a second round pick or a low first or another similar type of veteran guy in return.
And you just don't get, I mean, you don't get a ton of really great long-term solutions in the second round. Like, you know, you get some, but you don't get a bunch. So, and it's what's different about the NBA than it is other leagues.
And I agree with Boston. I think it's time to shake the deck in a major way.
Yeah,
whether that's Brown or Smart.
They did the big shakeup, right? They changed GMs. They changed head coaches. And now you're what, 35 games into the
cast.
Yep. Yeah, you're 30, 35 games in the season, or I don't know what they're at now. And like you've got to be thinking, all right, it's got to be the players at this point, right? It's got to be player continuity. This is just not the right combo of guys.
If I'm Portland, unless Damian Lillard is telling me, look, I don't care how frustrating this is. Portland is the place that I want to finish out my entire career. Do not trade me. I want to be here. If Dame is saying that, then you absolutely give that to him. That's one of those guys that has earned the right to play there as long as he will play. If he is saying, do what you have to do, then I think you start looking at your options, or you blow up everyone out of there, whether it's Yusuf Nurkic, whether it's CJ McCollum, you know, Robert Covington. You clear house on everybody else that's a veteran. And you let some of the young guys play, and you do a rebuild, and you keep Dame there as part of that if he's willing to do it. Sacramento absolutely has to be blown up because there are useful players there for playoff teams, and Sacramento has hovered around the bottom of the play-in here for seemingly forever now. But Rashawn Holmes, Harrison Barnes especially, Buddy Hield, and then De'Aaron Fox. It's been rumored that he is available. And if I'm one of the teams like Philadelphia, like Boston, that has been rumored to, you know, be sniffing around Damian Lillard and really trying to go that route, and I can't get Dame, I think really, really hard about trying to get De'Aaron Fox, who is younger, certainly not the shooter that Damian Lillard is, but is one. yeah. I mean, outside of Steph Curry and maybe Trey, you're on a really short list of guys. But De'Aaron Fox is an absolute game changer and can be your second best player, maybe your first best player. But ideally, if you're Philly or Boston, you're bringing him in next to Joel Embiid or Jason Tatum, you know, or what have you. Like those, or even if the Clippers are looking to blow something up, like you really kick the tires and try to pry him away. And if you can't get him, then there's those other usable veterans who are going to be helpful. You know, Portland, like we said, I think it's time to shuffle that deck there. If I'm Boston, I'm moving some guys around. If I'm New York or Toronto and the right deal comes up, I'm willing to do it. If I'm Philly, I am willing to go all in. If it gets me Jaylen Brown and or Damian Lillard, like I will move heaven and earth to get a big three around Joel Embiid. Even if that means, obviously, I'm ready to move Ben Simmons, but I'll move from Tobias Harris too, or whatever I have to do. Tyrese Maxey, it doesn't matter. Any of those young guys who've been really helpful and have played above their weight, it doesn't matter. I think this is the all-in time for Philly to try to take advantage of that in such a wacky year. Indiana is another one that keeps getting rumored to be blown up. They're not even really within spitting distance. They're 2 games back, but just the way they've played doesn't feel like they're within spitting distance of the play-in, and it's time to split up the Sabonis-Turner pairing, which we've heard about for years at the very least. But Malcolm Brogdon would fetch you something back. Sabonis would fetch you something real nice back. You make those moves. If I'm Cleveland and Kevin Love is playing well, I know I'm in the 5th seed, but if I can fool somebody into taking Kevin Love and I just continue on the rebuild with the young guys that I have, I do. In a heartbeat. Anything of value, move Love to one of those veteran teams, and I'm sure he'll be productive. But the injury issues and the mental issues with Love, not to make light of, the serious things that he's dealt with, because that's absolutely true. But there has also been, we know, some issues with Kevin Love just not wanting to play for a really bad team. He was like that in Minnesota after things got rough there too. Like, he's just one of those guys that doesn't do well on a losing team. So move him to a veteran-laden group and let them handle keeping him motivated and that sort of thing. So those are the teams that have got to make some moves. And if you're somebody like Chicago, we mentioned Philly, but Chicago, Utah, where you're on the brink of really being a contender, but you feel like a piece short, this is the time, man. Take advantage of it. I know Golden State and Phoenix are really, really good. I know Brooklyn, we keep expecting that they'll be whole by the time the playoffs roll around, and the Bucks are the defending champs, but it still feels pretty wide open, right? I mean, at least to get to the NBA Finals out of the Eastern Conference feels fairly wide open. And if you're in the West,
the East is so condensed. Like that. That's why we talk about, if you take advantage of an opportunity, like sadly enough now, like you're getting, like last year when so many teams were, getting hurt players throughout the season, especially at the end of the year. If they just take advantage of it. It's how Phoenix got themselves to the finals, basically. It's not just they gave it to them. It's just they went and they beat the doors off the Lakers, who were warming up at the time. They just took advantage of all their opportunities, and they were good. If you could be a team that started to get warm, this doesn't have to be the right time, but this is just a good time to be able to get warm and get your S together for a couple of weeks and make some hay in the conference. That way, when it does get tougher, you bought a little breathing room, so to speak, to sort of get those wheels juiced. By the way, I just looked it up. Would you like to take a guess at the career earnings for Kevin Love? 14 seasons.
He's probably, 250, 300 million?
235.
Okay.
And he's got another 28 million next year on a deal if he wants to be able to take that. So that's
and he definitely does, because he has refused buyout conversations the entire time.
Only been all NBA twice, both second team. And kind of wild to think about. Like, as good as he was in Minnesota, and as good as he was for a long stretch there in Cleveland, where you heard about his name constantly, only twice was he all NBA second team, which it's really hard to get on those lists. I mean, if you look at those lists,
it was, but his first couple seasons started out slow in Minnesota. Then he has those monster statistical seasons, but the Wolves are still bad. And so he goes to Cleveland, but is that third wheel. And like Chris Bosh had been with the Heatles, the stats just nosedive, but the productivity and the importance went up, kind of inversely proportional. So yeah, he wasn't going to get those individual accolades anymore with the Cavaliers. And that keeps him off some of those lists. And, but he's got a ring out of it and was a part of 4 teams that made it to the finals.
Both those times, by the way, happened in Minnesota for your information. Before we leave here, got a couple more minutes. I did want to ask you what your thought is about the NBA gaining a little more traction in negotiations, sir, with this early season tournament idea that's been floated around for the last couple of seasons, and now it seems like it could come into play as early as next season. That you sort of have some pool play early in the season with some of these games. Then you'll go into the 8 best records, go into a little bit of a tournament, and you go single elimination. They'll culminate right before Christmas, and the winning team, it seems right now, gets somewhere like $1 million per player to get that. Again, it's not like you got to go overseas to play anybody. It's not like you take away from your NBA schedule, so to speak. You play your games. You just have sort of a tournament that's been put together, and by the way, it also takes away 4 games out of the regular season. So the regular season at this point would go from 82 to 78 games. But you'd get a little bit more of an interesting start to the season as far as there's a tournament for the players to be interested in. And then you get that big sort of kickoff for Christmas, and then boom, you're off through the rest of the season.
At this point, I'm willing to try it. I don't see the harm in trying it 1 year, except for the statistical anomaly if you decide not to do it going forward. But see how it goes. Things have been so turbulent and transitional the last couple of years in the NBA, as they have been, around the world, and as they have been in all of the American pro sports.
And by the way, real quick, I think that's why this is the time to kickstart those negotiations, not kickstart, but put them into high gear. As far as, hey, listen, everything's been sort of wonky. We've already done a postseason tournament, we restarted the season after a couple months kind of tournament to figure this out in a bubble. Let's just try something. Go ahead. Sorry.
And I would love to tie not only the $1 million per player, I would love to then also tie some sort of draft sweeteners to it as well, so that you have a really concrete motivation if you are a coach, a coaching staff, a front office, to put your best out there early. And even as a player too, if I'm LeBron James and Anthony Davis, and I know that my team is probably going to be good enough not to get a nice draft pick, but I know we could use that help, and I want to sweeten my odds just a little bit. Suddenly playing to win that early season tournament really has some bearing for my championship chase. Maybe not this year, but next year. And not every NBA veteran is going to think in those terms, but there are plenty of them that will, and the gamesmanship that comes into that. So I would make it a real nice sweetener, honestly, if you wind up if you're the 2 finalists out of that tournament, that it is helpful for you in a way that maybe, bumps you up 5 slots or something like that. You don't want to wreck the rest of the odds, but we've already seen the NBA trying to tinker with that in order to get rid of tanking and in order to
I hate the way they do it anyway, so let's revamp that too. Like if we want to make some adjustments like that, I'm okay with it. Yeah, like if we want to just, make this where it's a player friendly, team friendly sort of kind of let's make it matter to everyone involved in this franchise. Yeah.
And honestly, I would go a step further and say you've got a preseason tournament, and once the regular season is done and the actual playoffs begin, you also have the consolation tournament for the teams that did not make it in. A single elimination consolation tournament, and there are draft odds on the line for that. We already have the NIT in college basketball, right? A lot of high school tournaments and that sort of thing. You've got your consolation bracket. Why not add that to the NBA side of things? And so you get at least one more showing for your team, more gate receipts. But if you win that consolation tournament, you maybe have 5-6 more games in your season, whatever it takes. And you've got that draft sweetener. I would do single elimination until the championship round, and then it's just best out of 3. So you're not really taking away from the playoffs, but maybe you run that for a little bit and let the playoff teams rest up and then come in fresh and give us the real show. But again, different ways to generate interest around all of the teams, keep them motivated to continue playing well and not tanking. Whatever you can do to take away that incentive to drop games and rest guys when you don't need to, I'm all for that.
I think preseason tournament. Okay, first let's do the draft tournament. You don't make the playoffs. Fine. You go into a tournament. Winner gets the number 1 seed. Huh? So
out of the consolation tournament?
Not the number 1 seed. Sorry, the number 1 draft pick. That's what I mean.
Yep.
So you win that. Boom. And listen, could it be the Spurs or could the Warriors technically have won it again? Yeah, but you saw what they just did the last 2 years.
The only thing about awarding it just outright then you might have the teams that are in the 9th or 10th spot actively tank because it's going to be better for them to drop out of the playoffs and get into the consolation tournament where somebody like Boston or Atlanta has a much better shot of winning that and getting the number 1 pick for the following year versus coming up and being a sacrificial lamb in, the bubble or whatever, the play-in group. So I would just sweeten the odds in a meaningful way. I wouldn't necessarily just assign it outright, because you don't want somebody to then game the system just to get into that tournament and beat up on the bad team.
I got this. Then if you do try to tank, doesn't even matter. If you lose one roster spot for next year. Boom. That's right. I'm punishing the team. You lose, you can't have the maximum number. You lose a spot. That's
so
right.
You're saying if you drop from the 9th seed down into the consolation tournament, you lose a roster spot, or any team that doesn't win
Listen, I'm trying to turn this into a 3-on-3 league, so everybody eventually will get to the
Players Association is never going to agree to lesser, fewer roster spots.
They're never going to agree to what. No one's going to agree to what I want. Like, I just don't like ping pong balls. Okay, I think that's stupid. Okay. Secondly, preseason tournament. I love that idea. Just the winner of that tournament, automatic berth into the conference finals. That's what I think. And
no. That's too sweet.
Come on, listen. If you want that excitement, boom. That's excitement.
You
people are
sweeten
trying.
the odds in meaningful ways for teams, but you don't do concrete prices outside of the money. There's too much on the line there that then you undo the actual playing of the playoff games to be rewarded.
Automatic berth into the NBA finals. Then
get out.
We'll unsweeten it. Then.
Just
we'll
unsweeten
it a little bit. Okay, you get a hoodie. How about that? Winner gets a hoodie. That's what you get. They get a basketball by association hoodie. How about that?
Arky Shea is a man of extremes, everybody, and this has been episode 88 of Basketball by Association. Yes, the Nemanja Bjelica
They get a free NBA League Pass membership.
They'll never agree to that.
Look, I wonder if that's a perk. I wonder if that's a perk. If you're an NBA player, like if you have like you get it free. I mean, all the millions of dollars you're making, like you get like $150 off, not off, but like you get.
I would have to imagine you get it for free through the team. Yeah, I mean, you have
to have it like
when I worked for
Knicks.com
Bleacher Report,
email address.
Yeah, when I worked for Bleacher Report, for example, they had their bulk company license, and we all had access to that through Bleacher Report. So you would have to imagine the teams do something similar. Anybody that's affiliated with the league.
I'm paying too much money.
Well, I don't have it anymore. It's been 5 years since I worked there.
Make a call.
Episode 88, everybody. Find us on YouTube, Spotify, Spreaker, iTunes. Like, share, subscribe. It is kind of ridiculous. But I'm looking forward to doing this again with you, and hopefully people will be healthier next time around.
You need more channels, NBA. Get on the TV more. I need to be able to see the Knicks and the Timberwolves. Come on now. By the way, Joel, who wins that game?
Minnesota.
All right, up yours. Shocking he took the Timberwolves.
Yeah. That's the smart pick, even if they weren't my team.
I don't disagree. All right. Bye, guys.